The most effective PR is that works in partnership with your wider communications team, with your fundraising, with your marketing. People don't give to organisations they've never heard of. Journalists can't just click their fingers and produce a story and get it out there. When it works really, really well, media coverage can really, really boost your organisation, its profile and your income, but then it can also destroy you.
Hello and welcome back to the My Fundraising College podcast. In this episode, we're going to be doing a deep dive into the world of PR and how it relates to fundraising. To help us with this, we are joined by Becky Slack, who is co-director of Agenda. Becky has nearly 30 years of experience in media and communications and has published a book, Effective Media Relations for Charities, and therefore is well equipped to help us understand the world of PR. Welcome to the podcast, Becky.
Thank you very much for having me, Stuart. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Although I do think that when you say I've got 30 years of experience, it does make me feel a little bit old. It's great in one sense, but then it kind of, feeling my age today, I think.
Oh, sorry to do that to yeah. But we're super excited because for us, it means that we're going to learn loads and loads from you. So we're excited to have you.
Really happy to be here. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so I've been a fundraiser for 15 years and I've sat in various departments that include the fundraising team, the marketing communications team, normally someone looking after branding, and then the PR guys. And if I'm really honest, and it's awful for me to say this, I've never actually been 100% sure what the PR team does. I know it has something to do with the media, and I know when things go wrong, they spring into action and do a load of damage limitation for us. But could you help me? What is PR and why should charities be doing it?
So PR stands for public relations. So it's basically about introducing your work and drawing attention to your work among the public, or sections of the public, depending on who you are and what it is that you're trying to communicate. And a very large part of that is the media. So it's about securing coverage in the relevant newspapers, magazines, TV, radio programmes. It can also be about keeping your stories out of the media as well, because, as you know, not all publicity is good publicity. And yes, it can be important to try and keep journalists at bay sometimes. But I think we can talk about crisis communications and negative publicity in a little while. But yeah, it's about raising your profile amongst your target audiences, in summary. So it's very much a core part of communications. Yeah. And actually, the most effective PR is that works in partnership with your wider communications team, with your fundraising, with your marketing, because the more joined up you are, the more weight you have, the more impact you'll have, the more reach you will get. So yeah, working together is really important.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to jump on that in a second, because PR does sometimes in kind of larger charities sit within a sort of wider team that includes these other teams. And it's really naughty, Becky. When I was in one team and when there was hushed tones about the PR guys, it was like, oh, that's the dark arts in the department. Because was all not quite sure what you guys did. We all loved you.
I think, sometimes we like to make ourselves feel important when, maybe we shouldn't. Although, it's an important part of the communications toolkit, but it is just one part.
But hopefully, I'm really hoping by the end of this, I'm going to, not that I've never not been in love with PR, but I want to get a real good understanding and appreciation for it. So my second question is, it's always struck me that working with the media and press is a little bit time consuming, and sometimes it can be really difficult to pin down the tangible benefits. Like, now I'm pretty sure that's just me not understanding how PR works. So could you talk me through what the tangible benefits are and some examples of what benefits you've seen in your career of doing effective PR for charities?
For sure. So I guess the first thing to say is that for charities, particularly those that are fundraising, people don't give to organisations they've never heard of. And so PR has a really important role to play in helping you reach new audiences and help people understand who you are, what you do, what the services are that you offer. And importantly, it can be about building trust and confidence. Yeah. Because again, a direct mail appeal might land on your doorstep, But if you've never heard of the organization, are you going to trust that direct mail? Will you give to it? I mean, there's a kind of PR, it plays a supporting role to fundraising and can really kind of enhance campaigns and boost awareness and recognition of the work that you would do. As far as kind of measuring the impact, it can be very difficult because, there's, if you think about communications and how you measure it, you've got your output. So what is the stuff that you've done? Then you've got your outcomes, and then you've got your impact. And if you're thinking about the impact, it's the same with fundraising. It can be very difficult to measure the impact. You can talk about, how many press releases you've sent out to journalists and how many journalists have opened them, and then how many articles you've secured. And you might be able to get a sense of the number of readers that publication has, to give you a sense of who might have seen it. But then did they go on and donate after having read that article? It's difficult to say. But if you think about some of the significant, some of the really big fundraising campaigns that have happened recently, and I'm going to refer to the Captain Tom campaign because
very topical.
Exactly, because this feels to me like the perfect example of a fundraising campaign and of a charity that's been very driven by its media coverage, both positively and negatively. So the reason that Captain Tom was able to raise so much money was that it kind of captured the public's hearts and minds, right? During COVID, they needed something hopeful to latch onto, to kind of give them some hope in a time that was really dark time. And the media loved it. So he was always in the news. He was on the telly. They were filming him in his back garden. They were doing interviews with him and his family. It was a really nice, heartwarming story. And that media coverage drove the fundraising results. Right? Without that media coverage, he wouldn't have been as successful as he was. But then, on the other hand, now all those millions have been raised. The role of the media, one of the roles of the media, is to hold the rich and the powerful to account. And so they were they were keeping a very close eye on that charity, wanting to make sure that the money was being spent properly. And when there was even a sniff of things not being as they should, they then started investigating, and then Captain Tom's charity was in the media again, but for all the wrong reasons. And so now, they're in a whole world of pain, and people don't trust them anymore, and people have stopped giving to them. And so, you can see there's two examples there of when it works really, really well, media coverage can really, really boost your organization, its profile and your income. But then it can also destroy you as well. So that Captain Tom is a really good example of the benefits and the disadvantages of the media. But other examples of the role that the media can play within charities. So we work with an organisation called Tree of Hope, which supports families who have children with life-limiting or life-threatening conditions where they can't get the treatment they need on the NHS and so have to fundraise separately. And so we do a little bit of PR with them where we place the stories of those families in the local press, in the national media. It raises awareness of their fundraising campaign and it inspires people to give. So it's contributed to raising hundreds of thousands of pounds over the years and over the months and years for those families. Because again, without that media coverage, not many people would have heard about their fundraising campaign, and therefore they wouldn't have got the reach that they needed. But then there's other ways as well. If you want to influence policy, if you want to change hearts and minds, media coverage has got a really important role to play in all of that. And again, this is where it's important to work in partnership with your communications and your fundraising teams to make sure that you are all on message. You're targeting the right audiences, you're hitting things at the right time in the right way. And you get, even for major donor fundraising, like if you know that you've got a meeting coming up with a wealthy individual, having an article let's say they read the Times, right? Yeah. If you can place a week before an article about your work in the Times, a week before you're due to meet that major donor, hopefully that donor might have seen it, or you can then take that article along to support your conversation with the donor. So it just it adds value. And again, how to measure the impact of that? Would that donor have donated without that article? Possibly, probably, but it may also have just been the one thing that just tipped it over the edge. So difficult to measure, but just because you can't measure it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it.
Yeah, no, this really resonates with me because we work with a lot of small and medium-sized charities who tend to be quite grant dependent because there's that kind of very clear-cut way of accessing funding. And so we're trying to encourage them to do more direct mail and events and other types of, individual giving, because that's nearly 50% of the money available in the UK. And the barrier for them is that the public just aren't aware of them, and this sounds like a really good way of starting. So if one of our small charity clients were coming to you, which I would highly recommend because you're awesome, could you give us like a sample of like what would you say to a small local or regional charity that has been grant dependent and is looking to go into individual giving but hasn't really got that awareness in the local area?
Yeah. So the most important thing to remember about effective media relations is it's all about the story. So what is the story that you are trying to sell to the journalist? Why is that story going to be interesting to them and their readers? Does it tell them something they don't already know? Does it advance a conversation in some way? Is it transformative? Is there some kind of shock and awe, triumph over tragedy? It's all about the story, and that story has to pass the so what test. So just to give you an example, I was chatting with an organisation recently who said that they wanted blanket coverage in the Scottish media.
Okay.
And I said, okay, so what's the story? And they said, oh, well, we've been doing really good work. And I was like, yeah, but that's not a story. They're like, yes, it is. I'm like, no, it's not. Charity does good work is not a story. Charity transforms the lives of hundreds of thousands of people is a good story. Or if you've got a really strong case study of an individual whose life has been absolutely transformed as a consequence of your work, you can hang a story off an individual case study. So so they didn't really have any really strong case studies. So I was like, right, well, what data have you got? Have you got any data that shows that, X number of people were in trouble and you came in and delivered this unique service and now, this is the result and it's saved the taxpayer X amount of money? No, we don't have that either. Okay, so do you have a strong opinion about something? Can we try and place a opinion piece, what we call an op-ed?
Okay.
So Indie Voices or Guardian comment is free, that's what we call an op-ed. And the opinion piece, the clue is in the title, it needs to be opinionated. And they said, oh no, we don't say anything because we get some of our money from the government, and so we can't be seen to be criticizing the government, otherwise we might not get funding. So I was like, okay, so you haven't got anything strong or interesting to say. You haven't got any data that we can use to create a news story, and you've got no strong case studies. I was like, honestly, I don't think I can help you. And I don't think you should be spending your money on PR. Go away and, I don't know, invest it in some other form of communications, because I think you might have more success with that. So strength of story is absolutely critical.
Yes.
And the way in which you can decide whether or not your stories are going to be of interest is look at the publication or media outlet that you want to secure coverage in. Have a look at the type of stories that they run, and see if you can find similar ones within your organization. So if there's a particular headline that you think, oh, we could replicate that with something that we've done, then great, like focus on that. But if you're kind of looking at it going, yeah, no, we can't do that, we wouldn't do that, we would never say anything like that, we don't have that type of story, then you might be wasting your efforts on that particular publication. Also for small charities, the big nationals probably aren't going to be that interested because you haven't got to reach the gravitas and the kind of national authority, but local media might be, specialist media might be, and actually the nationals will quite often keep an eye on local and specialist media, and if there's something that catches their interest, then they may pick up on it and then run with it in their own publication. So I would start local and start very focused and very specialized, and then think a bit bigger. Unless, of course, you do have access to some really juicy, meaty stories, and then I would say go for it. But make sure that that story is matched to the publication. Make sure that your audiences are aligned.
Yeah, no, that all makes total sense. And it's really interesting here because one of the things, when we go in and maybe a fundraising team and a marketing team are just not gelling that well, one of the things we have to keep saying to them is actually what's good for fundraising is good for marketing because it's about great stories. And so it sounds actually it's also good for PR. We're all kind of in the same ecosystem.
Exactly, which is why it's really important that these teams work together. And again, it's about working together early enough as well. So, it's all very well fundraising. Okay, we're going to do this appeal. We'll do it at Easter. And then communications is thinking about messaging and they think, oh, we've got a conversation going on with this policy person or this politician.
Yeah.
And then there's the PR team going, right, we need to get some media coverage. Actually, if you were all working together, you could be going, okay, this is the campaign that we're going to work on. We know that we want to influence policy. We know we want some stories in the media to support that influencing of policy. And we know that there's money that we can raise off the back of it. This is going to be of interest to the public. Let's work together, identify our target audiences, develop our set of key messages, and then figure out which channels we need in order to achieve our goals of whatever it is, policy change and fundraised income.
Okay, that's been. Do you have some examples where you've seen fundraising, marketing, and PR just working really nicely together?
Yes. So a current one, actually. So I probably shouldn't name them because I haven't actually got their permission to talk about their work.
No, that's fine.
There's an organisation that's working in the Middle East, and obviously with the conflict that's going on at the moment, giving them a real opportunity to fundraise, but also, they're very keen to influence politicians and the kind of the narrative around what's going on and the policy decisions that the UK government makes towards the Middle East. And so they're also fundraising off the back of it as well. They are placing lots of really strong stories in the national media about their teams on the ground in the Middle East, telling the often quite heartbreaking stories of the work that they've been doing or trying to do given the very difficult circumstances. Their fundraising appeals are then, on social media, they're then sharing this media coverage, they're pushing their fundraising appeals underneath it, and they're also, sending out lots of other fundraising communications that are all linked to this work too. And then at the same time, they're also having lots of conversations with politicians using the video footage and the conversations with their people on the ground to support their ask for those politicians. So that's all working really neatly together in one go. And as far as I can tell, it's being quite impactful.
No, that's brilliant. You've answered so many of my questions so nicely as you've gone along. So what I'd be interested in then, if you run an agency that helps charities with PR, could you talk us through when a charity should engage an agency like yours and how you would typically work with charities?
Yeah, so there's two reasons to work with an agency like ours. One, you haven't got the skill set in-house, or you haven't got the capacity. And we can help, and other agencies can help in those instances. As far as skill sets go, if you're thinking about media relations and trying to place coverage in the press, the skills that you need are, first of all, understanding what a story is, and being able to kind of extract that from within an organization and gather all the right elements together, the case studies and the data and the comment from the chief executive or from the beneficiaries or service users. So storytelling and understanding how the media works is a key skill that you need. Another key skill, well, it's not even a skill really, it's about contacts and relationships with the media, because the more journalists who write about the same sort of area that you work in, the more chance you have of placing coverage. So kind of making sure you understand what journalists are looking for, having those relationships with them so you can have a conversation with them, that kind of thing can be really important. And then also, if you haven't got those relationships, you can use databases. So there's a system that we use called Agility PR. There's another one called Gorkana, and they are basically databases that have just got hundreds of thousands of journalist names on them, and you can create a campaign tailored to, I don't know, let's say charities that write about disability. for example, and you can select them, and then you can make sure that you just target those journalists. So there's skills. And then capacity. So, a PR campaign can take quite a long time. And this actually is one of the things that I would advise your listeners to really pay attention to, and that is timeframes. Because we're invited to come and work with an organisation right at the very end of their project timeline, where they've kind of gone, oh, we've got a report. Oh, we should probably PR this. How can we get some media coverage for the report? And then they bring us in, and then they want the PR coverage kind of immediately. And because they've not thought it through from the very beginning, there might not be the right key messaging. There might not be the right kind of headline statistics that are going to create the news hook for journalists. Yeah, so the time frame. So, sometimes we get asked to PR reports where they've not really thought about what the media angle is, and they want things to happen immediately. Well, for us to do a really good job on a report, for example, we need to make sure that you've got some good headline statistics, you've got some good case studies in there, and that we start having conversations with journalists early enough. Because, journalists can't just click the fingers and produce a story and get it out there. They have to do their research. They have to do interviews. They might need to speak to case studies. They might need to do additional research. And it can take time to piece a feature together. News is slightly differently, because quite often that's just churned out on a day-to-day basis. But if you want somebody to give an article some thoughts and consideration, you need time. And it also needs to fit in with their editorial plan. Just because you want them to write about this story now doesn't mean that they want to. And it might be that they've got plans to do something similar, but in 3 months' time. And actually, if you just had a conversation with them, you could have, worked together and published everything at the same time, so that they get what they need, you get what you need, and you're all kind of working together, and you get bigger bang for your buck, so to speak. So thinking about things in advance, working with journalists early, knowing what they look for, all that kind of stuff is really important. And that's where an agency can come in, particularly if you haven't got a dedicated PR person.
One of the things I sometimes hear from our clients is when we're saying, I think you need to consider doing some PR, is there can be this fear for some people that if they start working with the media, they're going to turn on them. I mean, we already mentioned the Captain Tom example, which was a really extreme case of that. What would you say to someone who's never really engaged in PR and has that kind of fear of it? Because like I said sometimes it's seen a bit like a dark art in PR.
Yeah. I mean, so I did used to work as a journalist, and I used to go to events, and I'd start chatting with people, and they go, "Oh, so what do you do then?" And I'd say, "Oh, I'm a journalist." And they go, "Oh, I can't talk to you then." And I was kind of like, "Well, actually, you've not actually said anything that's very interesting, so don't worry." So, I think sometimes people think that what is going on in their world is more interesting than what it actually is, and so actually they probably don't need to worry. But some media training, which is, understanding how the media works, understanding what a story is, all that kind of stuff can put a lot of those fears to one side. So I don't think you need to be scared of the media and of PR, but you do need to be mindful of it. And actually, sometimes the media can pick up on things and they can create a mountain out of a molehill, and they can focus on particular things in a unjust way, particularly if that I'm thinking of certain right-wing publications, they can have it in for certain charities, and they can spin a negative story out of something quite wonderful, just because they're bitter. So it is important to be mindful of that kind of thing, but also, as I said before, one of the jobs of the media is to hold the rich and the powerful to account, and so journalists have an important role to play there. And so it just, I just think charities should also just be mindful of what they're getting up to, so that they, they're not going to be the subject of an investigation. But that said, let's assume that you are a small local charity and you're a bit worried about the media. For that reason, what should you do, right? So first of all, there's having some media training. Understand what journalists want, what makes a story, the types of things that they're going to be interested in. Put a crisis comms plan in place. So let's think about what is the worst thing that could possibly happen. What would happen if the media found out about that, and how would you handle it? And so doing that thinking early is really important, because once you're in the middle of a crisis and emotions are running high, like, you can't make sensible decisions about things, and that's when you say silly things and you don't do the right things and you don't communicate effectively, and it can make things worse. So I think of the crisis comms plan as an insurance policy. Like, you wouldn't not insure your building for fire and theft and flooding and whatever. You should also insure your reputation. And that's what a crisis comms plan is for. And then, there's some kind of groundwork that you can put in. So building relationships, building trust with journalists, so that, if something does go wrong, you can have an off the record conversation with somebody and help them understand what the real situation is. And then they might, I'm not going to say they would definitely, but they may go slightly easier on you. But I would say that 90% of the time, journalists aren't there deliberately looking for something negative and something bad that's happened. They're looking for a good story. And as long as you can give them a good story, then I don't really think you don't need to worry about anything.
Okay, no, that's really reassuring. Two points that came up there, and this will be my final question. So first, you mentioned media training. So for the uninitiated, if you could tell us where you would start, maybe with your book or other resources in terms of getting that media training. And then secondly, I'd love to hear more about this crisis plan, because it's kind of that thing where when the crisis hits, everyone goes, well, why didn't we do a sort of emergency communication plan? But also, I know the reality of day-to-day working in a charity, you are always scarce of time and find that. So if you could give us a bit more detail in terms of how do we get started with that'd be really helpful.
So just the media training question first. So yes, reading my book, I don't want to self-publicize, but that was kind of part of the reason why I wrote it, was because I recognized that a lot of the small and medium-sized charities that we were working with didn't really have a clue about how the media worked, what made a story, what to do in a crisis, none of that stuff. So that was kind of the reason for writing it. So that would be a good starting point, without blowing my own trumpet.
Oh, no, blow it to Becky, you blow it.
The other thing is that media training, so it helps you understand what journalists want, what makes a story, but it also helps you do a good interview. So if a journalist asks you a question, how do you answer that in a really clear and coherent and, importantly, concise way? Because a journalist, particularly, if you've got 2 minutes to do a news segment, you don't want a really lengthy 5-minute answer, because you're not going to be able to use it. So being able to get your work across in a nice pithy couple of sentences that's going to have impact in a 2-minute news segment is an important. It's very difficult to do that, actually. So that's an important skill to have. So that's one of the other things that media training will do. It also helps you answer difficult questions or not answer difficult questions. So there's a thing called bridging, where if a journalist says, why did you do this particular thing? Using a bridging technique, you can shift it away from that thing to what you actually want to talk about instead. So there's kind of lots of tips and tricks for that kind of thing. So and it also helps you keep calm in a crisis. When the media spotlight is on you and you've got you're in front of a camera and it's all very high pressured, even if it's not a crisis situation, even in a very positive media story, it can still be really nerve-wracking. And so media training can help calm your nerves, ground you, help you breathe, stop you fidgeting with your hands or shuffling in your seat or whatever other irritating thing that, if you're watching somebody, you're going to latch onto that thing and then not listen to what they're saying. So all that kind of stuff is covered in media training.
Fantastic. And then in terms of this emergency communication plan, so someone's listening to this now, I'm thinking, I need one of these. Our organization doesn't have them. Where should they start, and what should it tangibly look like? Because to be honest, I've never seen one, and that's awful, because I've worked for a whole series of charities, and it's something it's always on the agenda but never gets done.
So I'm going to give you an example of a very serious crisis comms situation that we worked on. And I'll name the organisation because it was a long time ago, and they no longer exist as a consequence of this crisis comms. So back in 2015, you might remember the telephone fundraising scandal when two Daily Mail reporters went undercover in GoGen, the telephone fundraising agency. So they didn't have a crisis comms plan in place, and they tried. When they realised that the Daily Mail was going to write this story, they tried just sending threatening letters to the office saying that we'll sue you for writing about us. Daily Mail's not going to care about that. They're still going to run their story. That's just, it's pointless. And actually, it's a bit like a red rag to a bull. It's, it's just going to fuel things rather than, like with crisis comms, you need to suck the oxygen out of it. Pulling it. And so there was no crisis comms plan in place. There was no chain of command. There was no roles and responsibilities set out. No spokespeople had been trained up. They didn't know what to do. And the Daily Mail was, so I kind of got parachuted in like 2-3 days into all of this media coverage, by which point, the horse had bolted. It was everywhere. It wasn't just on the Daily Mail. It was on mainstream television. It was on breakfast news. It was all over the place, which is too late. You can't deal with a crisis at that stage. And the Daily Mail was sending questions in, like maybe 20 questions in an email, like every half an hour, every hour. There was just this constant barrage of questions from the Daily Mail and then from other journalists. Oh, we need to know, so was this person working for you at this particular point in time? Did they receive this training? What did that training involve? Really detailed questions about the operations of the organization. And they hadn't really kept any, they'd got records of all their employees and everything, but a lot of that was under data protection. They didn't know what they could say, what they couldn't say. They didn't no planning whatsoever. It was chaos. They didn't know what to say to their staff. There was different messages. They were, the journalists were hounding staff as they were leaving the building. Then there was all the communications with their clients. So it was really fast and furious and stressful and emotional, and it was a really horrible experience, actually. And so had they had a crisis comms plan in place, they might have been able to spot when a journalist was in. They would have had key messaging ready. They would have known what to say. They would have had relationships, they would have spoken to their clients about what to do in a crisis. How are we going to work together? How will we support each other, or will we distance ourselves from each other? What's the plan going to be? Making sure that you've got good records so that when journalists send questions in, you can actually answer those questions. Knowing how to answer those questions without adding further fuel. Without kind of giving journalists cause to go, oh, what do you mean by that? Oh, so you did do that, right? Let's delve into that issue a little bit more. Just knowing how to respond to questions. Also, there's a thing around, how do you respond to criticism in a way that is respectful and has got the right tone, isn't going to land you in the proverbial with the lawyers, so knowing, we call it the 3 C's. So compassion for who's been affected, control, showing that you've got control of the situation, and then change. What is it that you've learned? What is it that you're going to do differently? And if you can kind of think about those 3 C's in your messaging, that can be a really good place to start.
But a lot of what you just described actually sounds like what should be in a healthy organization anyway. So, and I suppose this is, again, like we see this in fundraising. Sometimes the things we're saying to clients to do actually is just genuinely good practice and common sense.
And the thing is, as well, is that, spending time, to do a good crisis comm strategy, you need to bring all your senior leadership together. That includes your trustees, really. You need your SLT there. You need your comms people there, your fundraising people there, programs people. Like it's got to be an organizational activity, thinking about what do we do, because everybody's got a role to play in it. And so you can't develop these things in isolation. And if you do, then people aren't going to buy into it. They're not going to know what their roles are. They're not going to know what to say and what to do. So it can be quite time and resource intensive to do, but once you've done it, it's done, and then it's there, and you just need to make sure you revisit it just to make sure it's still up to date and that everybody knows what they're doing. And it's just things like, so a journalist phones you at 5 o'clock on a Friday. They've heard that this thing has happened that you're involved with, which is really bad, but you've not got a decent you've not got a press contact on your website.
Yeah.
How do they then get in touch with you? Or they do find a way to get in touch with you, but then your chief executive's gone off on holiday and is in the air and you can't get hold of them. Who do you talk to then? How do you get your messaging signed off? Like if you've not thought about all this stuff,
Yeah,
you don't have a plan in place, and then it's really horrible and stressful, and then you make mistakes and it can make a situation worse. So, plan.
and I think that's really important advice about, it can't be just left to the PR person or team to sort out, because we see this in fundraising. A lot of the times people just go, oh well, that's a fundraising problem, let them figure it out. And actually a lot of these things are organization wide issues. Yes, you have a team of specialists, but it needs to involve everyone.
Exactly, which brings me right back to one of the very first points that I made, which is about effective media relations. Effective PR has to be done in partnership with other teams. It's got to be part of your strategy. Standalone stuff is ad hoc. It's not going to have the desired impact, and it's going to be a waste of time. So, be joined up in all of your thinking, and that's how you will be successful.
Amazing. Becky, first of all, you've absolutely converted me now, and I am a big PR fan, so thank you so much. And secondly, we've sadly run out of time, and I could easily speak to you for another hour. I've loved every minute of this. So thank you so much.
It's been good fun. Thank you.
No, absolutely. One of the things we do to thank all our guests is we send them a book in the post, a little thank you book. But the gimmick we have is we get the previous podcast guest to choose the book for the next person. Could you give us a book that we can give to our next podcast guest, please?
Yes. So it's this one here.
Okay.
It's called Poles Apart: Why People Turn Against Each Other and How to Bring Them Together. And it's by Alison Goldsworthy, Laura Osborne, and Alexandra Chesterfield. And it's all about why people become divided, how we reduce hostility, how we can create mutual love and understanding. And I think in a world that is increasingly divided, I mean, you can see it with what's going on in Israel and Palestine at the moment. You can see it within politics. It's immigration rhetoric. Like the world feels really divided, and people kind of sit in their tribes and fiercely defend them, and it's just not great for the world.
No.
And so I'm all about how do we bring people together. That for me is really important. And so this book is excellent. It's got loads of for the theory geeks. It's got loads of theory, and it's grounded in psychology and neuroscience. Nice. But it's also got loads of best practice in it, and it's got loads of ideas. And I just think for any organisation that works, I mean, charities work in difficult areas where there will be some strong opinions and some emotional responses to the work that they do. And I just think it's a really great read.
Brilliant. I'm probably going to read that myself. That sounds fantastic. Oh, thank you so much again for joining us, Becky.
Thank you for having me. It's been great. And I hope your listeners find it useful. And if anybody wants to, if they didn't understand anything that I said or wants to pick up on it and get more information, then they're more than happy for them to get in touch with me.
How do they do that, Becky?
I would say that on social media would be the best way. So connect with me on LinkedIn or on Twitter or X, whatever it's called these days. So on X, I am at Becky_Slack. And then you'll find me on LinkedIn as well.
Brilliant. In the YouTube description, we'll put all your social media handles there.
Thank you.
Thanks again. And we look forward to seeing you all next time. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the My Fundraising College podcast. I really hope you found it useful. If you did, please like the episode, please subscribe to the channel, and why not even share the link to the episode to someone you know who you think might find its content helpful. If you need any support with your fundraising, please contact us at chelperkins.com. We can help you with anything from grant fundraising to direct mail to event management. So reach out to us and our team will be glad to speak to you about your fundraising needs. And last but not least, the first module for My Fundraising College is due to come out early in 2024. This is one you're not going to want to miss. Make sure you register your interest at myfundraisingcollege.co.uk. Until next time, best of luck with your fundraising.